Madison Whitmore slinked into the courtroom as if it were her personal runway, each step deliberate and commanding. The sharp clacks of her designer heels echoed against the polished floor, a rhythmic declaration of her presence. Oversized sunglasses shielded her eyes, not out of necessity but to mask the boredom lingering within them. She'd been here before, another court date, another slap on the wrist, another high-priced lawyer ready to sweep this mess under the rug. Reckless driving? Big deal. Every incident had left her unscathed, and in Madison's world, that was all that mattered. Her father always handled the fallout, writing checks, making calls, smoothing ripples with practiced ease. With an exaggerated sigh, she dropped onto her seat, tossing her quilted designer bag onto the table as an afterthought. The air in the courtroom felt stifling, thick with outdated formalities and the weight of lives tethered to this space. Unbothered, she pulled out her phone, scrolling absently while waiting for the charade to end. Then, with the nonchalance of someone lounging at home, she produced an elegant vape pen from her pocket and took a long drag. A dense, fragrant cloud escaped her lips, curling through the air like silk. Its cloying sweetness mingled with an artificial tang, filling the room. A few people coughed, one clerk wrinkled their nose in disgust. A man seated near the front waved a hand in front of his face, trying to dispel the intrusive haze. But Madison didn't care. She exhaled another plume, fingers still tapping idly on her phone screen, detached from the murmurs rippling through the room. The prosecutor glanced up, eyebrows furrowed in irritation. One of the bailiffs shifted uncomfortably, staring at her in disbelief. At the center of it all, Judge Naomi Carter, a woman who had spent decades behind the bench, slowly set down her papers. Tension crackled in the air, stretching taut like a rubber band about to snap. Finally, Judge Carter spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Miss Whitmore, put that away immediately." Madison didn't look up. The words barely registered over the hum of her disinterest. Without lifting her gaze, she took another drag, the tip of the vape glowing like a silent act of rebellion. Judge Carter's expression hardened. Ignoring her was not an option. "Miss Whitmore," the judge said sharply, punctuating her words with a decisive strike of her gavel that reverberated through the room. The sound jolted Madison from her scroll. Annoyed, she pushed her sunglasses atop her head and muttered, "Seriously? Relax, Grandma. It's not even a cigarette." Silence fell over the courtroom. Even the stenographer paused mid-stroke, hands hovering above the keys. Judge Carter's expression remained impassive, but something in her eyes sharpened, a tacit warning. "This is a courtroom, Miss Whitmore," she said, her tone measured yet laced with undeniable authority. "Not your father's yacht. Consider this your first and only warning." Madison scoffed, rolling her eyes theatrically as she stuffed the vape back into her bag with exaggerated annoyance. Slouching in her seat, she crossed her arms, exhaling like a petulant child denied dessert. The judge studied her for a moment before returning to the case file, but the tension in the room was palpable. Madison had just made a grave mistake she had yet to comprehend. Minutes dragged on. Madison barely listened as the attorneys droned on about reckless driving, public safety, repeat offenses, and potential consequences, blah, blah, blah. She'd already tuned out. Judge Carter wasn't intimidating, she was just another old woman pretending to wield power, acting as if she belonged among the real players, the ones who called the shots, people like Madison's father. Bored and irritated, Madison rummaged through her bag, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of her vape. With a smug smile, she pulled it out again. This time, she made a show of it, tilting her head back and taking a long, exaggerated drag before releasing a massive cloud of sickly sweet vapor into the air. Artificial berries and mint invaded the courtroom like toxic fog. People coughed. Papers rustled. The prosecutor sucked in a sharp breath. One of the bailiffs stepped forward, raising his voice. "Ma'am, I need you to..." Before he could finish, Judge Carter brought down her gavel, the crack slicing through the tension like a blade. Enough. Her voice cut through the heavy air, commanding silence. Miss Whitmore, stand up. Madison let out a loud, dramatic sigh, shifting in her seat as though asked to perform a Herculean task. What now? She whined, twirling a strand of platinum blonde hair around a perfectly manicured finger. Judge Carter's piercing gaze locked onto her. Do you think my courtroom is a joke? Madison met her stare, lips curling into a slow, insolent smirk. The weight of the room, the glares, the mounting tension, it meant nothing to her. With a voice dripping in arrogance, she sneered, "What do you know? My dad will have you thrown in jail with the rest of your kind." The words landed like a gunshot. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. No one breathed. The room went silent as a collective gasp rippled through the air. The stenographer's fingers froze above the keys, suspended in disbelief. The prosecutor, who moments earlier had been lazily flipping through documents, sat bolt upright, eyes wide with shock. Even Madison's lawyer, one of society's most seasoned defenders, pinched the bridge of his nose as if struck by an invisible blow. Judge Carter remained seated, her expression unreadable, but her knuckles whitened around the gavel she gripped tightly. "Excuse me," her voice sliced through the tension like a blade, low, deliberate, and dangerous. Madison smirked mockingly, crossing her arms with defiant confidence. "You heard me." With a casual shrug, she tossed her hair over her shoulder and muttered just loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear, "I bet you only got this job because of some diversity quota." The silence that followed was suffocating. The black court clerk beside Judge Carter shook his head with faint disgust. The prosecutor's jaw clenched so tightly that his temple twitched. Even the burly bailiff shifted uncomfortably, his broad shoulders tensing as if bracing for an explosion. Madison's words hung heavily in the air, thick, ugly, undeniable, unavoidable. Judge Carter let the silence stretch on, allowing it to settle like lead over every person present. Then, with terrifying calmness, she lifted her gavel. "Miss Whitmore," she said in a voice soft yet icy, "you have just made the gravest mistake of your life." The courtroom remained frozen, the tension thick enough to choke anyone who dared breathe. Madison stood there, arms still crossed smugly, her face unchanged, waiting for the judge to say something, anything, that might give her an opening. But Judge Carter wasn't finished. Leaning forward slightly, the judge locked eyes with Madison. Her tone was firm, measured, but colder than steel. "Miss Whitmore, you've just committed the single biggest error of your privileged little life." For a fleeting moment, Madison's smirk faltered, but she quickly waved a dismissive hand. Yeah, whatever. Declare me not guilty and let me go. Daddy will take care of it." The judge paused, her silence sharp and deliberate. "Your daddy," she said, her voice low and ferocious, "has no power here." A murmur rippled through the room, but Judge Carter silenced it with a single glare. Calmly, she flipped through the file before her, reviewing the charges. "Your offenses," she continued, her words slow and controlled, "include reckless endangerment, destruction of property, and driving under the influence." Madison shifted uneasily in her seat, her confidence beginning to crack. "That's it? Just." The judge cut her off. "I've read your file, Miss Whitmore, and I'm unimpressed by your behavior. But your words, your actions, are unforgivable." She leaned back in her chair, her gaze unwavering. "I've heard enough." Turning to the bailiff, she spoke with authoritative precision. "Take her into custody immediately." Madison's face drained of color. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Finally, she stammered, "Wait, what?" The judge raised her gavel. "I hereby sentence you to the maximum penalty, 5 years in state prison." The gavel crashed down with thunderous finality, echoing through the room. Madison's jaw dropped. The ground seemed to shift beneath her feet. All her privileges, all her father's wealth, it meant nothing now. She was just another criminal, a spoiled child whose tantrums and threats could no longer shield her from the consequences of her actions. Her mind scrambled to catch up to reality, but panic set in. The walls felt like they were closing in, her chest tightening with each passing second. She tried to speak, but only a shrill, inhuman scream escaped her lips. "You can't do this." Her voice cracked as she bolted to her feet, gripping the edge of the table. "My father will sue you." But the judge didn't flinch. She struck the gavel again, cutting off Madison's tirade. "Bailiff, remove her." The bailiff stepped forward, his large hand firmly encircling Madison's arm. She erupted into full-blown hysteria, thrashing and pulling with every ounce of strength she could muster. "No! No! You can't do this," she shrieked, her voice hoarse and trembling. "I can't go to prison. I'm too pretty. I can pay. I swear, I'm sorry." Tears streamed down her face, streaking her once flawless makeup into dark rivers of mascara. Her foundation smeared, her lipstick smeared across her chin as uncontrollable sobs racked her body. The porcelain face that had once epitomized privilege crumbled before everyone's eyes. Yet, no one cared. With careful but unyielding movements, the bailiff dragged Madison away. She kicked and screamed, her heels clacking against the hard floor as her cries echoed down the hallway. The courtroom remained silent, watching the spectacle unfold, the once arrogant heiress reduced to chaos. Judge Carter exhaled slowly, her gaze sweeping the room. There was no satisfaction in her eyes, only cold, unyielding justice. "Let this be a lesson," she said, her voice carrying the weight of everything Madison had learned at great cost. "Money cannot buy respect. This court is adjourned." As the noise of Madison's collapse faded, only the hum of the air conditioner and the rustle of papers remained as the courtroom emptied. In the years to come, the memory of that day would linger, a brutal reminder that privilege has its limits and justice waits for no one. Madison Whitmore's life, once a glittering display of privilege and excess, transformed into a cautionary tale for anyone who ever took their advantages for granted. The former queen of her gilded world, sheltered within a bubble of wealth, comfort, and unchecked entitlement, was thrust into a merciless reality. Judge Carter's decision did more than impose a prison sentence, it marked the beginning of an irreversible transformation. Madison's name became synonymous with scandal, splashed across headlines as a stark reminder that no amount of money or influence could erase the consequences of reckless choices. Gone were the days of champagne-soaked galas and designer wardrobes. Her father's once invincible legal team proved powerless against the weight of public disdain. Each failed appeal only deepened the chasm between Madison and the elite circles she had once effortlessly commanded. Inside the cold, unforgiving walls of the penitentiary, the harsh truth settled in: her 5-year sentence wasn't just punishment, it was reckoning. The shield of privilege that had protected her from accountability dissolved, leaving her exposed to society's brutal rules. No longer golden, Madison was now just another face among countless others, stripped of identity, status, and control. Her attempts at manipulation and charm fell flat in this new environment, where arrogance held no currency. Prison life demanded humility, something Madison had never been forced to cultivate. Friends who had once adored her glamour and extravagance vanished, replaced by silence and indifference. Designer dresses, luxury vacations, and exclusive parties became distant echoes of a life she would never reclaim. Behind bars, Madison confronted the harshest version of herself, a person defined not by wealth or connections, but by actions and consequences. When her release finally came, the outside world offered little solace. Society had moved on without her, indifferent to her struggles. Her tarnished reputation preceded her at every turn, slamming doors shut before she even reached the handle. Job prospects dwindled, social invitations disappeared, and the admiration she once enjoyed turned into cold rejection. Without her family's fortune or superficial network to support her, Madison faced the daunting task of rebuilding from scratch. But the dream of returning to her old life crumbled under the weight of reality. Every attempt to start anew collided with reminders of her past mistakes, each etched indelibly into her criminal record. The painful truth settled in: Madison Whitmore was no longer the untouchable heiress she had once been. Her future, once bright with promise, had been irrevocably altered. What remained was a woman stripped, not only of material comforts but also of illusions about her place in the world. The cost of her recklessness had been high: a shattered reputation, broken dreams, and a life forever changed. And as she stepped uncertainly into the future, the shadow of her choices loomed large, a constant reminder that some paths lead only to ruin, and there is no turning back.